The laughter cut through the crisp Colorado morning air like a blade. 22 pairs of eyes followed my every step as I walked across the parade ground at the Air Force Academy, their snickers barely concealed behind polite military bearing. The cadet who had accidentally bumped into me at the dining hall smiled apologetically, but I caught the smirk he shared with his classmates. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "Didn't see you there." I straightened my shoulders, feeling every one of my 55 years in that moment. The weight of their judgment pressed down like the thin mountain air, making it harder to breathe. But I kept walking, kept my chin up, because I had learned long ago. That dignity was the one thing they couldn't take from you, unless you let them. My name is Colonel Sarah Mitchell. Retired, and this is the story of how a group of cocky cadets learned that experience trumps youth. And respect must be earned, not assumed. Before we dive into this journey of unexpected redemption, I want to thank each of you who have supported. Stories of perseverance and second chances. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unlikely teachers. If you've ever felt underestimated because of your age or background, this story is for you. Hit subscribe to join our community of readers who appreciate tales of quiet strength and unexpected triumph. 6 months earlier, I had been living a comfortable retirement in Denver, tending to my garden and volunteering at the local Veterans Center. 28 years of military service had earned me a full pension and the right to put my feet up. I'd served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen other places most people couldn't pronounce. I'd commanded squadrons, mentored young officers, and earned my way to colonel before age and politics convinced me it was time to step aside. The call from Brigadier General Patricia Hayes came on a Tuesday morning while I was deadheading roses. "Sarah, I need a favor," she said without preamble. Pat had been my roommate at the academy 30 years ago, and we'd maintained our friendship through deployments, marriages, divorces, and all the chaos that military life could throw at us. The academy needs an interim instructor for advanced combat strategy, she continued. Professor Martinez had a heart attack last week. We need someone who can step in for the spring semester, someone with real-world experience who can handle these hotshot cadets. I almost said no, almost. The idea of returning to the academy where I'd struggled so hard as a young woman seemed like asking for trouble. But Pat pressed on. "These kids think they know everything, Sarah. They need someone who's been there, who's actually commanded troops in combat. They need you." The Air Force Academy hadn't changed much in 30 years, at least not architecturally. The same gleaming spires reached toward the Colorado sky. The same imposing buildings stood as testaments to military precision and pride. But the attitudes, those had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. I reported to the commandant's office. On a Monday morning in January, dressed in civilian clothes that suddenly felt foreign after decades in uniform. The young captain who processed my credentials looked at me with barely disguised confusion. "You're the new combat strategy instructor?" she asked, double-checking her paperwork. "Interim instructor," I corrected. "Colonel Mitchell, retired." "Right," she said, though her tone suggested she thought there'd been some kind of mistake. "The cadets are energetic this semester. Very confident." I would learn exactly what she meant by confident within hours. My first class was scheduled for 0800 hours in Mitchell Hall, named, ironically, for no relation of mine, but for Billy Mitchell, the father of the Air Force. Room 314 could hold 40 cadets, and as I walked in carrying my briefcase and a thermos of coffee, I saw it was packed. Word had apparently spread about the old lady professor. The talking stopped when I entered, but the smirks didn't. I could feel them sizing me up, categorizing me, dismissing me. At 55, my hair had gone more silver than brown, and I'd never been what you'd call traditionally beautiful. I was average height, average build, with the kind of practical appearance that had served me well in a man's military, but apparently marked me as invisible in civilian life. I set my materials on the desk and turned to face the class. Good morning, cadets. I'm Colonel Mitchell, your interim instructor for Advanced Combat Strategy. A hand shot up immediately. Cadet Johnson, according to my roster, a tall, athletic young man with the kind of confidence that comes from never being truly challenged. Ma'am, no disrespect, but what's your actual combat experience? The question hung in the air. In the back row, I caught a cadet whispering to his neighbor, and both laughed quietly. Another cadet, Stevens, I thought was openly scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to hide his disinterest. Excellent question, Cadet Johnson, I replied evenly. I served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Commanded the 332nd Fighter Squadron during Operation Enduring Freedom, and later the 4th Operations Group. I've planned and executed combat missions involving everything from close air support to strategic bombing campaigns. Johnson's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on. That was a long time ago, ma'am. Warfare has changed. These days it's all about cyber operations, drone technology, space-based assets. Have you kept up with modern developments? More snickers from the back. A few cadets exchanged looks that clearly said, here we go, another old-timer living in the past. I walked slowly around the desk, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet room. You're absolutely right, Cadet Johnson. Warfare has changed dramatically. Tell me, what do you think is the most significant evolution in combat strategy over the past decade? He straightened, clearly pleased to show off his knowledge. Asymmetric warfare, ma'am. Non-state actors using unconventional tactics. Cyber warfare. The democratization of technology means small groups can now threaten major powers. Interesting, I nodded thoughtfully. And how would you counter an enemy using those tactics? Superior technology, ma'am. Better intel, faster response times. Overwhelming firepower when necessary. The room buzzed with approving murmurs. These cadets clearly thought Johnson was nailing it. I let the moment stretch out before responding. Let me tell you about a mission in Afghanistan, I said quietly. And something in my tone made the whispers stop. April 2010. My squadron was tasked with providing close air support for a special operations team that had been pinned down in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The enemy, a small group of Taliban fighters, had used the terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves in caves that made traditional airstrikes nearly impossible. I walked to the whiteboard and began sketching a rough tactical map. The conventional approach would have been exactly what you suggested, Cadet Johnson. Overwhelming firepower. Level the mountain if necessary. But those caves were also being used as shelter by local villagers. Our rules of engagement were strict: no civilian casualties. The room was completely silent now. Even Stevens had put away his phone, so we adapted. I continued. Instead of fighting the terrain, we used it. Psychological operations combined with precision strikes. We used the mountain's acoustics to our advantage, employing sound as a weapon to flush the enemy from the caves without harming civilians. It took 3 days instead of 3 hours, but we got our people out alive and kept the locals on our side. I turned back to face the class. Superior technology is useless if you don't understand the human element of warfare. Every conflict, no matter how advanced, ultimately comes down to people making decisions under pressure. And experience, the kind that comes from actually being there, teaches you things no simulation can. Cadet Johnson had the grace to look slightly chastened, but I could see the skepticism still lingering in many faces. They were polite enough for the remainder of the class, but I felt their judgment like a weight on my shoulders. After dismissal, I overheard fragments of conversation as they filed out. She's not so bad, I guess, but ... Did you see her trying to use the smartboard? My grandmother is more tech-savvy. I heard they couldn't find anyone else willing to take the job. The worst part was the laughter. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive. The kind of laughter that says you're a relic, a placeholder. someone to be tolerated until the real teacher arrives. I spent that evening in my temporary quarters, a small apartment in faculty housing, questioning my decision to accept Pat's offer. Maybe I was too old for this. Maybe these young, brilliant minds needed someone who spoke their language, someone who had grown up with technology instead of adapting to it. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. I arrived early to set up for class, only to find that someone had helpfully left a stack of printouts on my desk. Top 10 tips for using technology in the classroom, a senior's guide to PowerPoint, and making retirement meaningful. Anonymous. Gifts, no doubt well-intentioned by someone who thought I needed help. But it was Cadet Martinez who pushed me over the edge. A brilliant young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious, driven, impatient with anything that seemed to slow her down. As I struggled with the classroom's audiovisual system before the third lesson, she stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Here, let me help you with that, Mom," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the entire class to hear. "These systems can be tricky if you're not used to them." She fixed the connection with a few quick clicks, then returned to her seat to barely suppress chuckles from her classmates. The gesture was efficient, probably even meant to be kind, but it felt like the final confirmation that I didn't belong. Here, that afternoon, I sat in my office drafting my resignation letter to Pat. I had given it an honest try, but maybe it was time to admit defeat. These cadets deserved better than a has-been colonel who couldn't even work a projector without help. I was sealing the envelope when my computer chimed with an urgent email from the Pentagon. A crisis was developing in the South China Sea. Chinese military exercises had gone beyond their announced boundaries, and American naval vessels were requesting immediate air support analysis. The situation required someone with deep knowledge of both air-to-ground coordination and international protocols to provide strategic recommendations within hours. I stared at the screen, reading the classified details that had been shared with select military advisors. This was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered problem that had defined my later career. Without thinking, I opened a new document and began typing my analysis, my fingers moving with the muscle memory of decades spent crafting operational plans under pressure. 3 hours later, I had produced a comprehensive strategic assessment that accounted for political sensitivities, operational limitations, and tactical advantages. I encrypted it and sent it back through secure channels, then sat back in my chair, feeling more like myself than I had since arriving at the academy. The next morning, another email waited in my inbox, this one from Admiral Chun at Pacific Command, thanking me for analysis that had directly influenced the Pentagon's response to the crisis. The situation had been resolved without incident, and my recommendations had been cited in the brief to the Joint Chiefs. I looked at the resignation letter sitting on my desk, then slowly tore it in half. Walking into my 4th class that week, I felt different. Not because anything had changed externally. The cadets still saw me as the old professor who needed help with technology, but because I had reminded myself who I really was. Not just someone with outdated experience, but someone whose experience remained deeply relevant. Cadet Johnson raised his hand during my lecture on air superiority doctrine. "Ma'am, this strategy assumes traditional nation-state conflicts, but what about situations involving multiple stakeholders with competing interests?" I paused, remembering the crisis I had just helped resolve. "Excellent question. Let me give you a current example. And I told them about the South China Sea situation, not the classified details, but the strategic principles involved. How? You balance multiple objectives, navigate political constraints, coordinate with allies whose priorities don't perfectly align with yours. How real-world strategy requires not just tactical brilliance, but diplomatic finesse and cultural understanding." This time, when I looked out at the class, I saw something different in their faces. Not the polite tolerance I had grown accustomed to, but genuine attention. These were smart young people who recognized valuable information when they heard it. After class, Cadet Martinez approached my desk. "Ma'am, that analysis of the multi-party conflict scenario, is that something we might see on the final exam?" "It's something you might see in your career, Cadet Martinez," I replied. "The exam is the least of your worries." She nodded seriously, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw not condescension in the student's eyes, but respect. That evening, I deleted the resignation letter from my computer and opened my lesson plans. Tomorrow's class would cover asymmetric warfare, and I had some very current examples to share. The laughter had hurt, and the assumptions had stung, but I was beginning to realize that earning respect was a process, not an entitlement. These cadets were about to learn that experience isn't just about age, it's about wisdom gained through trials they had yet to face, and I was just getting started. The stage was set for a semester that would surprise us all.